Much more politically focused start to the year than normal, particularly with the news poll out today, a slump in the support from the government. We've heard from a few government spokespeople this morning. Now I'll bring you a news conference from a short time ago from the Deputy Labor leader, Richard Marles.
This is a major crisis and there's a lot going on, but for the kids who have gone through it, this is something they'll remember for the rest of their lives. And how they remember it, how this impacts the rest of their lives is one of the really significant outcomes of the bushfire crisis that has been experienced. So it's critically important that there is a child-focused agency like Save the Children who have been able to provide the child-safe spaces, but more than that, the expertise around how to get kids through this crisis in a way where they are able to process this and place this really significant event in their childhood in a proper context. And the work that Save the Children have been doing around the country through this crisis has been unheralded, but it's been critically important work, and we are really grateful to Paul to have had the briefing today to see the fantastic efforts that his organisation Save the Children have been able to provide. I'd like to address a couple of other issues of the day. Today HMAS Toowoomba leaves Western Australia for its service in the Persian Gulf. This is the 68th deployment since 1990 of an Australian frigate to the Persian Gulf, and providing freedom of navigation support to that part of the world is very much in our national interest. It's very important work, and I'm sure that I speak on behalf of everyone when I say that all of our best wishes and thoughts are with the Australian men and women who are in our Navy, who will be part of HMAS Toowoomba and the work that it provides. I'd also like to comment on remarks that were made this morning by Minister David Littleproud when he intimated that the role that the ADF has been playing in this crisis has been unprecedented. Certainly the work that has been performed by the ADF is work that Labor supports, and the men and women in uniform who have been providing that work have provided exemplary service. But this comment, along with comments that were made by the Prime Minister yesterday, are remarkable. I mean, yesterday the Prime Minister seemed to suggest that moments of national crisis are in effect a state issue, and that previously there hasn't been an expectation of Commonwealth involvement. This is patently wrong. One only needs to look at the role that the ADF played in the Black Saturday bushfires, in the leadership that was provided by Kevin Rudd and the Commonwealth Government back then, to see the role that Commonwealth governments in the past have played in moments of national crisis. Now, whether we're talking about cyclones or floods or bushfires, the Commonwealth has always played a critical role in national crises. And in a moment of national crisis, we look to our national leader, to our Prime Minister, for empathy, for support, for leadership. And yet, you know, from the beginning of this national crisis, what we've seen is a Prime Minister who basically ran away from the country without telling anyone, a Prime Minister who, far from providing any form of empathy, has been out there literally forcing people to shake his hand, a Prime Minister who has led a government which has been incredibly slow in terms of engaging the Commonwealth in this national crisis, most notably in terms of the delay that the government engaged in terms of getting the ADF involved. And on one of the worst fire days of this season, this was a Prime Minister who spent his time on that day making a party political advertisement. You know, this is a Prime Minister who has not been engaging in leadership. This is an engagement in panic. And it's not panic on behalf of the nation, it's panic on the part of Scott Morrison himself. Panic about his image, panic about his level of support, panic about his standing in the community. This is a Prime Minister who has been very loose with the truth. And from the very first moment of this national crisis, this Prime Minister has been entirely focused on himself and actually quite disinterested in the national interest, in the people who have been affected by this crisis. In moments of national crisis, we get to see the character of our national leader, of our Prime Minister. And over the last 2 months, sadly, we've seen an unfiltered, an uncensored and a very disappointing version of Scott Morrison. Any questions?
Do we need a royal commission into this bushfire crisis, given that we've had so many fires before following the catastrophic fires?
Look, we are open to a royal commission into this the bushfire crisis, but let's be clear, this cannot be an excuse for Scott Morrison to continue to do nothing. I mean, we cannot have a situation where Scott Morrison uses this as a basis for inaction on his part. Now, last year, we were calling for a meeting of COAG to be brought forward so that the Commonwealth could engage in coordination of national effort. That has not occurred. As I said, we've seen the Commonwealth be very slow in having the ADF engaged in this national crisis. It is critically important that we do not see Scott Morrison use a Royal Commission as an excuse for his continued inaction and hopelessness in the face of this national crisis.
How quickly do you think a royal commission could be held and the report back?
Well, Royal Commissions by their nature take time, and they need to take time, which is why it's really important that this not be seen as an excuse on the part of Scott Morrison to do nothing now. I mean, there's a whole lot of actions that need to be taken, most notably in terms of providing the coordination in respect of this crisis, which are in a time frame that a Royal Commission is not going to meet. So the Royal Commission's all well and good, we're open to it, but right now we actually need the Commonwealth to be acting, and right now we've got a Prime Minister who is doing everything he can to avoid responsibility for his failures over the last 2 months.
Recently he's been talking about evolving climate change policy. What kind of emissions reduction targets do you think the government should be adopting?
Well, we need to have a federal government which takes the issue of climate change seriously. That's the starting point. I mean, we've got a federal government who has been unable since 2013 to come up with any form of coherent policy in relation to climate change at all. And the reason for that is because it's got a party room which is full of climate change deniers. I mean, here we have an extraordinary crisis facing our country, and members of the government are going on international media in a process of denying climate change. It is breathtaking. And this is why the government has been so incapable of coming up with any coherent policy around climate change, and that's what must change now.
Do you think the community concerns about climate change have evolved and changed since the election, especially given the crisis that we're currently in?
Well, certainly as I speak to people in my electorate and as I speak to others from around the country, it is clear that this event has been enormously significant in terms of the way we all see the issue of climate change. This is an unprecedented event, and I think there is a crying out from Australia that we first of all have a government which acknowledges the issue of climate change and then does something meaningful in response.